1964 was the year American cars started becoming completely wild, because now we're no longer talking about just big V8s and fast cars. We're talking about machines built to destroy tires, humiliate rivals, and dominate drag strips. So in this video, you're going to discover some of the fastest American cars of 1964. And honestly, several of them still feel completely out of control today. 1964 Pontiac GTO. This car wasn't just fast. It completely changed the way America understood speed. Because before the GTO, most powerful cars were still huge luxury coupes with gigantic engines. But Pontiac decided to do something far more dangerous. Take a relatively smaller car, drop a massive V8 into it, and turn it into an absurdly fast machine for the streets. The result was brutal. Under the hood, the GTO used a massive 389 cubic inch V8, producing up to 348 horsepower with the famous tri-power triple carburetor setup. And in 1964, that was seriously intimidating, especially in a car lighter than many rivals of the era. The result, 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 6 seconds. That was absurdly fast for a street car in 1964, especially considering the brutal torque available at almost any RPM range. And that was exactly the magic of the GTO, because it didn't look exotic. It looked like a relatively normal American car until it accelerated. There's an important detail. The GTO was practically born as an experiment inside Pontiac, because GM officially restricted large engines in mid-size cars at the time. But Pontiac ignored that by turning the GTO into an optional package for the Tempest. And the success was unbelievable, because Americans immediately understood that this car was different, especially in acceleration. When you look at the design, that also helped. The muscular stance, the hood scoops, and the relatively discreet appearance made the car feel like a true sleeper for its era. When you look at current values, that also reflects its importance. A well-preserved 1964 Pontiac GTO can easily exceed $100,000, depending on configuration. 1964 Dodge Polara. This car looked like a huge American luxury sedan, until it destroyed almost anything at a drag strip. And honestly, that's exactly what made the Polara so terrifying in 1964. Because underneath that gigantic body was one of the wildest engines Chrysler had built up to that point. The legendary 426 Ramcharger, a monstrous V8 practically prepared for competition, officially producing around 425 horsepower, although many believe the real number was even higher. And in 1964, that was absolutely insane, especially in acceleration, because this car was built with one very specific goal: dominate the quarter mile. And honestly, it did that extremely well. Some 426 Polara versions were capable of quarter-mile times in the low 13-second range completely stock, something brutal for such a large and heavy car. And that was exactly the magic of the Ramcharger, because it looked like a relatively normal American sedan, until the moment it accelerated. There's an important detail. The famous Ramcharger setup used an extremely aggressive high-performance intake system, helping the massive 426 breathe like a true racing engine. When you look at the design, that also played a role. The huge body, the aggressive stance, and the relatively discreet appearance turned the Polara into one of the most violent sleepers of 1964. Production of these extreme versions was also relatively limited, and that helped the car become highly desirable among Mopar collectors today. When you look at current values, that also reflects its legendary status. A well-preserved 1964 Dodge Polara 426 Ramcharger can easily exceed $150,000. 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. This car was basically a dragster disguised as a street car. And honestly, very few American cars of the 1960s were as absurd as the Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt, because Ford didn't create this car with comfort, luxury, or practicality in mind. It was built for one thing only: winning drag races. And the result was pure insanity. Ford took a relatively compact Fairlane, stripped weight from everywhere possible, and stuffed a monstrous racing-prepared 427 V8 under the hood. Officially, it produced around 425 horsepower, but once again, many believed the real number was much higher. And honestly, the car's behavior seemed to confirm it, because the Thunderbolt was violently fast, 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 4.7 seconds. Yes, under 5 seconds in 1964. And the quarter mile could fall into the 11-second range with proper setup, something completely absurd for the era, especially considering this was still technically a street-legal car. There's an important detail. Ford built only around 100 Thunderbolts, specifically to homologate the car for NHRA Super Stock competition, and that instantly turned it into a legend, because practically everyone knew this was not a normal Fairlane. It was a race car in disguise. When you look at the design, you can feel it there too. The aggressive stance, the massive hood scoop, and the brutally simple appearance. Everything feels built around pure acceleration. When you look at current values, the reality becomes insane. An authentic Ford Thunderbolt can easily exceed $300,000 depending on history and originality. And now, I want to know something. Which of these 1964 monsters feels more absurd to you so far? The brutal Polara Ramcharger, or the completely wild Thunderbolt? Let me know in the comments. 1964 Chevrolet Impala SS. This car perfectly showed why Chevrolet dominated American streets in the 1960s. Because the Impala SS 409 managed to do something extremely difficult, look elegant, huge, comfortable, while still being absurdly fast. And honestly, that made it even more intimidating. Because while some muscle cars were beginning to look aggressive and radical, the Impala still looked like a big American luxury coupe, until it accelerated. Under the hood was the legendary Chevrolet 409 V8, one of the most famous engines of the entire decade. In its most extreme versions, it produced up to 425 horsepower, and in 1964, that placed the Impala SS among the fastest American cars you could buy, especially in a straight line, 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 6 seconds. And quarter-mile times in the low 14-second range made this enormous Chevrolet shock a lot of people, mainly because it looked heavy and calm. But the massive torque of the 409 completely changed the car's personality. The sound also played a huge role, because the 409 had one of the most recognizable exhaust notes of the entire muscle car era. The engine became so famous in America that it even inspired the iconic Beach Boys song 409. And that helped turn this car into part of 1960s American culture. When you look at the design, that also explains a lot of its success. The long body, the elegant appearance, and the sporty details of the Super Sport package made the Impala look fast even standing still. Production numbers were much higher than some of the more extreme cars on this list. But that's exactly why the Impala SS 409 became one of the most iconic muscle cars of that era. When you look at current values, that has also changed dramatically. A well-preserved Impala SS 409 can easily exceed $100,000 depending on configuration. 1964 Ford Galaxie 500. This car looked enormous, but it could accelerate far quicker than anyone expected. And honestly, that's exactly what made the Galaxie so impressive in 1964, because while many manufacturers were beginning to focus on mid-size muscle cars, Ford was still proving that a gigantic American full-size car could also be brutally fast, especially with the legendary 427 V8 under the hood. And that's where the story completely changed, because this engine was practically born in NASCAR, officially producing up to 425 horsepower, with an absurd amount of torque for the era. And in a car this large, it felt completely excessive, especially at high speeds. The Galaxie 427 was incredibly fast in a straight line, capable of going from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 6 seconds and reaching top speeds close to 135 miles per hour. Absurd numbers for a massive American coupe in 1964. There's an important detail. Ford heavily used the Galaxie 427 in NASCAR during that era, and that helped the car earn an extremely aggressive reputation among American enthusiasts. Because everyone knew that engine was serious. When you look at the design, that becomes obvious too. The long body, the low stance, and the muscular yet relatively elegant appearance made the Galaxie look powerful without needing to exaggerate. When you look at current values, those have changed dramatically as well. A well-preserved Ford Galaxie 4.2.7 can easily exceed $150,000, depending on configuration. 1964 Plymouth Sport Fury. This car looked far too elegant to be this violent, but underneath that massive chrome-filled body was one of the wildest engines of the entire muscle car era, the legendary 426 Max Wedge. A monstrous Mopar V8 developed practically to dominate American drag racing. Officially, it produced around 425 horsepower, but once again, many claimed the real output was considerably higher. And honestly, the numbers seemed to confirm it, because the Sport Fury was capable of quarter-mile times in the low 13-second range completely stock, something brutal for a huge full-size car in 1964. Especially considering the absurd torque delivered by the 426. There's an important detail. Max Wedge versions used extremely aggressive components for the era, including optimized intake systems, giant carburetors, and a setup practically designed for racing. And that gave the car a completely different personality from normal Plymouth models. When you look at the design, that also helped tremendously. The long body, the muscular stance, and the relatively discreet appearance made the Sport Fury feel like a true giant sleeper. Production numbers were also relatively limited, and that helped transform Max Wedge versions into some of the most desirable Mopars today. When you look at current values, that also reflects their legendary status. A well-preserved 1964 Plymouth Sport Fury 426 Max Wedge can easily exceed $200,000, depending on originality. And now I want to know something. Which of these American monsters feels wilder to you so far? The gigantic Galaxie 4.27 or the brutal Plymouth Max Wedge? Let me know in the comments. 1964 Chevrolet Corvette. This car proved that America also knew how to build real sports cars. And honestly, the Stingray still looks fast even standing still. Because while many cars on this list relied on massive size and gigantic engines, the Corvette followed a different path. Lower, lighter, more precise. And that gave it a completely different personality, especially in the famous fuel injection version. Under the hood was the small but extremely aggressive 327 cubic inch V8 with mechanical fuel injection, producing up to 375 horsepower. And for such a compact American sports car in 1964. That was seriously impressive, especially because the car weighed far less than the enormous full-size muscle cars of the era. The result? 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 5.5 seconds, and a top speed above 150 miles per hour. Extremely serious numbers for the mid-1960s. The most impressive part was how the Corvette delivered that speed. Because the Stingray didn't just feel powerful, it felt like a true sports car. The independent suspension, the low driving position, and the far more precise handling. When you look at the design, it still looks spectacular today. The sharp bodywork, the aggressive curves, and the iconic Stingray identity helped turn the Corvette into one of the most legendary cars of the entire decade. Production numbers for fuel injection versions were relatively low, and that increased their exclusivity even more today. When you look at current values, that also reflects its importance. A well-preserved fuel injection Corvette Stingray can easily exceed $200,000 depending on configuration. 1964 Mercury Comet Cyclone. This car looked small and innocent until it started humiliating much larger and more powerful cars. Because while most Americans still associated speed with huge full-size coupes, Mercury was proving that a smaller car could also be absurdly fast, especially with the right setup. And the Cyclone made that very clear. Under the hood, the most aggressive versions could use high-performance V8 engines heavily prepared for drag racing, including setups derived from the legendary Ford 427. And although the car looked relatively discreet, its performance was anything but, especially in acceleration. There's an important detail. The Comet Cyclone became famous after setting multiple speed and endurance records at Daytona during the 1960s, helping Mercury build a much more aggressive and sporty image. And that completely transformed the car's reputation. Because the Cyclone no longer looked like an ordinary compact car, it looked like a true American sleeper. The low weight also helped tremendously, because combined with extremely powerful V8 engines, the car accelerated brutally for its time, especially in short launches. And honestly, that made the Cyclone feel far more aggressive than its relatively simple appearance suggested. When you look at current values, those have also changed dramatically. A well-preserved Mercury Comet Cyclone can easily exceed $100,000 depending on configuration. And when you look at all these cars together, you begin to understand that 1964 was the moment American horsepower stopped being reasonable. Because at this point, manufacturers were no longer trying to build merely fast cars. They were building monsters. And now, I want to know something. Which car in the entire video feels the most brutal to you? The wild Thunderbolt, the revolutionary GTO, or one of the massive Mopar monsters? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see how all this insanity started growing before fully exploding in 1964, you need to watch this video about the fastest American cars of 1963, because many of them were already warning exactly what was about to happen in America. See you in the next video.